Hey guys, it's Lauren and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the internet and how it affects our minds, at least my mind. So I wanted to do this because I just finished this book, which is called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, and this is the book here. I got it from just a used bookstore, actually in Portland, Oregon. I can't remember the name of this store, but it's like this huge bookstore, and it's amazing. And I just happened to come upon this, and it's really fascinating. I've been thinking for quite a while now, or I've been kind of just concerned about the way that the internet, and maybe even more specifically social media, affects us these days. And because I've noticed patterns with myself, especially in the last few years, but as I think about it more and more, I've noticed issues that I've had since I was probably like a preteen. And I just kind of want to talk about those a little bit and kind of like share my experience and, get your feedback too for anyone who's watching this, and kind of just have a discussion about maybe ways that we can manage our internet use to protect our mental health and our overall wellness. So first I'll just start with talking about myself a little bit. So I used to really rebel against the term addicted when it comes to the internet, but I really do think that I have struggled with what could be very, very close to an addiction to the internet for a lot of my life. So I remember being in, probably junior high. Yeah, junior high. And it's kind of when I first discovered, I don't know if anybody who's watching this remembers Neopets, but it was a site called Neopets, and it's where you could go online and you could have these pets. They're these digital pets, and you can feed them and you care for them, and you can have them painted different colors. I think you had to buy a paintbrush that was really expensive because everybody had these shops. They had these storefronts so you could buy and sell items, and you could decorate your store. You could add music to it. I think you had a profile too. I can't remember, kind of like MySpace, but you could, Neopets is the first place that I learned about HTML because I used to be a web designer. So that's kind of what got me into that, because I would just make my storefront look really pretty and everything and add music to it. And it was just this really fun this online world where you could connect with other people. I think there were chat rooms. There was a stock market, a Neopets stock market. It was just a really, really fun website, and I was on there so much. And I had friends who were on there so much. I even kind of made friends on there. I connected with other people who weren't living anywhere near me. I didn't know anything about them. And so I was really into that. And I remember just being thinking about it all day. I had a computer class in junior high, and I would check my Neopets on that. I think they may have eventually blocked anything like that, but I would do that. I remember having a blog in junior high. It was a Blogspot. And then, a few years later, AOL was so big, so you would be on there messaging people. And I remember when my family finally they switched from dial-up to broadband, so we were able to be online all the time, because before I had to limit my time on, because, it was connected to the phone. So it was I couldn't be on all the time because my parents needed to get phone calls and stuff like that. So I remember when we switched to broadband, and then it was oh my gosh, I can be on this all the time. So then I would have my AOL Messenger signed in all the time and be able to receive messages and email, and then Facebook became a thing. And I had a relationship at one point in high school that was long distance, and so I was pretty much always on my computer messaging and video chatting with that person. And I remember that when I was on the computer, it just felt good. I just felt connected. I felt drawn to it. And when I wasn't on my computer, I was thinking about being on my computer. I remember going to family members' houses and asking for their internet password so I could get on the internet and check my Neopets or check my Facebook. And it's like I couldn't just be where I was. I couldn't just enjoy being with family. I was thinking about being online. I wanted to be online, and I just felt drawn to it. And when I wasn't on it, I would feel irritable and cranky, and I would just feel, my brain would feel all over the place. I didn't want to be like where I was, even though I wanted to be with family, but it's like I was so easily bored. And then, texting is a thing, and I eventually it took me a while to get a smartphone, but when I got a phone that had texting on it, then I was always on that texting my friends back and forth. And then once I got a smartphone, it was like, well, you can be on social media at any time, right? Twitter, I remember Twitter, when Twitter was new and I was on that. So anyway, and I didn't know at the time, like I've mentioned on this channel before, I was diagnosed with ADHD a couple years ago, and I really started learning more about what anxiety is. And since doing that, it's really just helped me understand my brain. So a lot of it had to do with just being perpetually distracted and so much in my head and anxious and not knowing how to cope with those feelings and those struggles. And so I would turn to the internet as a way to distract myself from the way that I was feeling, and also it was like a dopamine release. And I used to laugh at people who would say this, who would say that like we're using internet as a drug, the whole dopamine release thing, like it makes you feel good. But now I really, truly am in that camp because I've realized the effect the internet has had on me. And I remember having fights with my family growing up, with parents, because I would be on my computer all the time instead of spending time with them. I remember we used to have like family game nights once a week, or I think it was once a week. And it's like, even then I was still thinking about wanting to get up and be on my computer. And it was just all this time that was spent like not helping me at all. Ultimately not making me feel better, not allowing me to be present with my life. And, during that time I was also struggling with binge eating and over exercising and just a really low body image. I wish that I had known about intuitive eating back then, because I don't know if I guess it would have been binge eating disorder. I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, but I was certainly very, very erratic in my eating behaviors, and it caused me a lot of stress and a lot of suffering. So I would use the internet to distract myself from that too. So fast forward to today, and I've just really become so aware of how much I'm on my phone, how much I'm drawn to my phone. And so when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I started to learn more about it. And also another thing is that when I first started working a full-time job, I've always been somebody who likes to read. Like I loved the Harry Potter books. I remember just like diving into them and just reading for hours and hours on end. And I noticed that when I became an adult and I started working a full-time job, and I was just dealing with a lot of the overwhelm that comes with that, going from being in college, being a student full-time, and that's a whole nother story with how distracted I was in college, but then going into working 40 hours a week and dealing with adult responsibilities and all of those kind of things. And I was just always just overwhelmed, and I was dealing with a lot of emotions and a lot of anxiety and not knowing how to help myself. And I remember wanting so desperately to read like I used to as a kid. Like I wanted to dive into a novel. I wanted to enjoy a story. And I got really into like nonfiction back then, like reading stuff like this book, The Shallows. I really wanted to learn more. But I remember sitting at my lunch break at one of my jobs, and I was sitting in the break room, and I really wanted to read this book. American Gods actually was the book, which is now like a TV show, and I think it's a TV show, right? Not a movie. I haven't watched it yet, but I heard it's really good. And so I remember reading that book, but I remember like reading it and getting to the end of a chapter, and even the end of the book, I finished the book, and I can't tell you hardly anything about that book. Like I remember a few things, but I couldn't tell you the characters' names. I couldn't tell you like the general story. And I remember reading like a sentence and then immediately forgetting what I read. And it was really frustrating because I felt like my brain was just falling out of my head. I felt like my brain was just like giving up on me. Like I wasn't retaining any information. And I was so frustrated by that because I want to learn new things, and I want to like learn, and I want to read, and I've always known that reading is good for you, right? So yeah, I kind of started, just in the last few years, I started like wondering why this is, and that's when I was led to the ADHD thing, because a few years before that, I had learned more about anxiety, and I'd started meditating and doing mindfulness practices, and kind of learned a little bit how to manage that. So I had my anxiety under control, but then I was like, then I would just feel like foggy brained during the day. I would just feel like it would be so easy for me to stay on task, and I'd always be drawing on my phone. And so that kind of led me to the ADHD thing. And since then, I've just really learned a lot about distraction. And I've learned that it's not just me, for one thing. And I don't think you don't have to have ADHD to be addicted to, or whatever you want to call it, to be influenced by technology and the internet, and deal with the distraction that it can cause. But it's not just that. One thing I've learned in this book is that our brains, there's neuroplasticity is a real thing, meaning our brains adapt to our environment. They adapt to how we're using them, basically, what we're doing. So back when, before we had books, people would just read. You'd have I think they're called like orators, but they would read to an audience, right? They would be the ones that would read out loud, and it was more like a performance to a group of people. So if you saw the way that writing was that they were reading back then, you wouldn't even recognize it. And then when we, with the advent of the printing press and being able to mass produce books, everyday people like you and me would be able to read a book. We wouldn't have to listen to someone read it. So our brains got into this, they started being able to have this deep focus and concentration for long periods of time. And so it really changed our brains. And now that we have like the internet, and we have where we read stuff online, and we have blog posts, and we have, you read a blog post, and it's usually not long paragraphs of text. If it is, most of the times it's not going to get read very much these days. I'm a freelance writer, so I know that an effective way to get people to stay on a page is to break up the sentences, or not break up a sentence, but not have a paragraph that's like more than 2 or 3 sentences, and to, use things like bold and italics and headlines, and to break up the page, because we don't have the time or the attention span to stay on the page, because we have things like hypertext now. So it's like you can be reading something, and then you see something that's linked, and so you're like, you want to click on that, so you go to that. And just the way that the internet is, that it doesn't encourage deep thinking or deep work. Deep Work is another great book that I recommend, actually. But it kind of encourages this erratic flipping back and forth through things. And so that is kind of, our brains have been adapting to that. And it's almost like they've adapted back to the old days when people weren't reading. So it was like you were kind of, you kind of had a shorter attention span. Like you didn't have to focus like you do, when you're reading or writing or staying on task, doing something. So, and then we have our smartphones, right? So our smartphones give us notifications for every app that we have, every social media app. You can turn them off, but you're going to get notified if you don't, right? And a lot of people check their email at all times a day. They have their email up all the time. So there's always something to take you away from the task, to distract you. And really just what Nicholas Carr goes into in this book is a lot of that kind of stuff. He mentions a lot of research studies. He refers to a lot of experts who have talked about this field, neuroscientists, people who have talked about how the difference they've noticed with the internet in their attention span. And I have personally even heard, despite my own experience, but I personally even heard people that I know say man, my memory's just not what it used to be, or I just can't sit down and read a book anymore. And it makes me so sad. It makes me really, really sad. And that's why I've been so frustrated for so many years, because I feel that happening in my brain, and I feel it, and I used to fight against it. And I've noticed that since my ADHD diagnosis and like taking some medication and just learning coping techniques, I now set aside time every day to read. And I know it's not that easy for everybody. And some days it's not even that easy for me to make that time if I feel like I need to be doing something else, because we're so flooded with all these tasks every day. I've been reading books from the 19th century, like the early 1800s lately. Like I've been reading a lot of classics, and it's really fascinating because it seems, and of course it's different depending on what class you're in. Like I'm not trying to say things were better then, but a lot of the stuff I read, people are like middle or upper class, so they have a lot more time to just sit and like devote their time to hobbies and to writing and to reading. And it really kind of makes me envy that, because I feel like it's so easy now to just be so overwhelmed. We have so much going on. Like when our jobs, we have emails from our bosses all the time. We have social media. We have all these ways that we're plugged in constantly. And it's really not, I don't want to say it's not natural, because a lot of things in life are not natural, but it's just, I don't think that it's good for our brains. And I worry about how it is for our mental health too. And I just don't think this bombardment of information at all times is good for us. I've heard a lot of people say that being on social media, it doesn't make them feel good. They start comparing themselves to other people, or they just feel like they're outside of the real world. They're not spending time in the moment with their friends and family. And that's kind of what I've realized in the last few years, is that, okay, this really is something I have to dial back, and I have to figure out how to do it. Because what's been hardest is figuring out how to do that. It's not that easy. Like it should be. It should be that you just don't look at your phone all day, or don't check social media all the time. But I feel that pull to do it. I've gotten a lot better, and that's something to note, that it has gotten better. But when I first started looking into this, I was like observing myself, and I would try to sit down and read a book, and sometimes not even a few minutes, 5 minutes would go by where I would feel this pull to check my phone, or I would feel this pull to like do something else. Like I felt like my brain needed more stimulation than what I was reading on the page. And it was crazy. It was like I felt this pull to check my phone, and when I didn't, like I started to get anxious. I started to feel bad. So it makes me think of what it's like when somebody's addicted to something, and it's like if they don't get what they need, then there's a problem. Like their brain doesn't like that. So I found that the more that I've made time to read, I try to do at least 30 minutes a day. I love when I get an hour to read, and I know not everybody has that luxury, because I'm my current situations, I do have a lot of flexibility in my day, if I really admit it. But the more I've done that, the more I've been able to focus on things for long periods of time, and really just like take some deep breaths and really get into a book and dive into it and actually remember some things and like actually enjoy the book, and actually be able to read like classics that the way they write back then is not necessarily easy to read compared to today's dialogue. So it's really just showed me that I can, with the more practice I give my brain, the more I can get into that deep focus and that deep sense of learning and remembering things. But I have to be careful about how I use my phone, and I have to be mindful. So that's just some things that I've been thinking about a lot. There's a lot more to it, which I'll probably talk about later. And I actually recently wrote a really long blog post. I shouldn't say really long, because I want people to actually check it out. But I tried to like make it, because I know that a lot of us don't have a lot of time. And one last thing regarding that is he talks about how it's different versus reading like pages of a book versus reading on a screen. There's something about reading on the screen that makes it harder to just stay on task and read and not get distracted. It affects us in a different way, which is actually why I got this Kindle Paperwhite as a gift for Christmas. And it's been amazing because it kind of mimics what a page looks like. It's not like a lit screen. So that's been really amazing. And then I also been trying to read more just books. Cause I noticed that too. Like I would try to read on my iPad, like in the Kindle app, and like it would hurt my eyes for one thing after a while, but also it's like I just couldn't read it in the same way. It didn't feel like reading a book. So anyway, yeah, so there's a lot more to it that I like to go into, but yeah, the blog post I'll link below if you want to check it out. It's titled, I can't remember what it's titled right now, but it's talking about the impact of social media on our brains and kind of just my thoughts recently and kind of what I've been doing. So some things that I do to help is there's an app, and I can't think of what it's called. It's like something Kill. I can't remember. I think it's a Chrome app. I don't know. If I think of it, I'll link it below. But there's several apps that you can use that will like block you from certain websites. So you can block yourself from all social media for a certain period of time, and it kind of encourages you to stay on task and away from it. That's been really helpful for me. I turn off the automatic check for social media or for email on my phone so that I don't get notifications when I get email. So I can just check them at specific times of the day. And I turned off the notifications for social media on my phone so that I have to actually physically open up the app to check it. And I really try to be mindful of when I check my social media accounts, and just be like, okay, am I checking this because I'm bored? Is there actually a reason for me to be checking this? How am I feeling when I check this? Because I've really realized that my anxiety is highly correlated with my use of social media. So I try to be mindful of just like how I feel when I'm checking it. And if there's something else I need to be doing, I just close it out right away. And I just, if I'm feeling really anxious about what I'm supposed to be doing, then I just take a few moments to like take some deep breaths and connect with my environment a little more, connect with where I am, and just look around and just like look at the big picture and be like, okay, what do I need to do right now? And how can I divide it into little chunks to make it more doable if I'm overwhelmed? So that helps me a lot. And then reading an actual book or like a Kindle or something like that for at least like, just a few minutes a day, like a chapter a day, if that's all you can do. I think that really, and if you start to feel distracted, just like push through it, just give yourself a little time. Like if it takes you a while to comprehend what you just read, take a deep breath, go back and read it, stick to it, and just know that you're not going to die. Which sounds dramatic, but like literally I've felt before when I'm distracted and I'm pulled towards something that it's like this urgency, like something bad's going to happen if I stay focused. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'd love to know if you understand. So that helps me a lot. And then, meditating every day. And if a certain type of meditation you try doesn't work for you, try something else. I've been doing these 10-minute meditations that I found on YouTube, these guided meditations. And they've worked better for me than anything, even more than the 3-minute ones I've been doing on an app. So find what works for you. Yeah, and those kind of are the main things that have helped me recently. If you can, read The Shallows or read my blog post, check it out. And yeah, that's all I can think of for now. I don't want this video to be super, super long, but if you can relate to what I'm saying, if you have had a similar experience, please let me know. Leave me a comment below. I'd love to know what you guys think and kind of what maybe you've noticed that helps for you or what you're struggling with. I'd love to have a conversation about this because the way that the internet and social media has impacted us and the way that I think it's contributing to some mental health issues and also kind of our disconnection with reality, and also like this I was talking about here, affecting our ability to focus and get deeply into things. That's something I think about on a daily basis, and I think about it a lot. And so I'd love to know what you guys think, and I really want to talk more about this topic and really just dive into it more. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment below, and I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.